When I opened my eyes, what I saw was the crystal chandelier in the Shin family's old mansion. My head felt like it had been hit with a hammer, buzzing and throbbing. I stared at that chandelier for 3 seconds, then sat bolt upright. No, I've seen this light before. In my past life, I died on the way to see Leah, and the last thing I saw before I died was an operating light, not this thing. Sis? What's wrong? A familiar voice came from beside me. I turned and saw Leah, my sister Leah, lying on the big bed next to me, staring at me with those big innocent eyes. She was wearing that light pink silk pajamas, her hair spread out on the pillow, looking like a painting. But my eyes instantly turned red. Leah died in my past life. She jumped from the 20th floor, wearing that purple cheongsam she hated the most, because she was too depressed to even have the strength to change clothes. Sis? Leah was startled by the look on my face and propped herself up. Did you have a nightmare? A nightmare? Huh. I flipped over and sat up, grabbing my phone from the nightstand. March 15th, 2024. March 15th. My heart nearly leaped out of my throat. March 15th. Tomorrow is March 16th. On March 16th of my past life, Leah married Damon, and I married Julian. 2 weddings, the same hotel, the same time, like some absurd transaction. Leah, I grabbed her hand, my voice trembling. What's the date today? Number 15, sis, what's wrong with you? Listen to me. My words came out like rapid gunfire. Right now, are you hesitating about whether to get married tomorrow? Are you thinking Damon is pretty good, his family is rich and powerful, he's decent looking, and even though he's a bit cold to you, Mom says feelings can grow over time? Leah's face changed color. I continued, in your past life, you were married to him for 3 years. Your mother-in-law nitpicked at you every single day, saying you weren't good enough to be a proper Mrs. Gu. Your sister-in-law made a joke out of your dowry in front of her friends. Damon came home twice a month and slept in a separate room every time. You went to the hospital and were diagnosed with severe depression. Your medical records showed you had suicidal thoughts at least 3 times, but no one knew. Because you never said a word. Leah's lips were trembling. In the end, you jumped from the top floor of the Gu family's old mansion. My voice finally turned hoarse. I got the call and rushed over, but on the way, I was hit by a truck. I died too. The room fell silent for 5 seconds. Leah's tears fell one by one at first, then she threw herself into my arms, crying like a child. That was how she was in her past life. No matter how much she suffered, she never said a word, and when she finally broke down, even her crying was silent. Sis, she choked out, I remember too. I remember everything. I held her tight, my eyes reddening, but I didn't cry. I've never been one to cry easily since I was a kid. My mom used to say I had a sharp tongue and a hard heart. Leah was the complete opposite, soft-spoken and even softer-hearted, someone anyone could push around. Sis, Leah looked up, wiped away her tears, and suddenly said something that caught me off guard. I don't want to marry Damon anymore. I raised an eyebrow at her. I want to marry Julian. Her gaze was more resolute than ever before. In your past life, you married him, and you two fought for 3 years. But do you know what kind of person he really is? The day you had the car accident, Julian stayed by your body in the hospital, crying like a madman. He did have feelings for you. I was stunned. Julian cried like a dog? That man who would slam doors at the drop of a hat and argue so loudly he could blow the roof off. And also, Leah took a deep breath, he found out later that you took a knife for him in your past life, but by then it was already too late. He's always felt he owed you. My mind was a tangled mess. Memories of my past life flashed before my eyes like a revolving lantern. My marriage to Julian had truly been a disaster. We were both too strong-willed, neither willing to give in, fighting every 3 days and having a big blowout every 5. But to be fair, he wasn't a bad person, we just weren't compatible. So what you're saying is, I said slowly, you marry Julian, and I marry Damon? Leah nodded. I laughed. In my past life, Leah had settled for marrying an icy man and ended up losing her life over it. In my past life, I had married a man I was fundamentally incompatible with, and after 3 years of constant fighting, we had worn out all our feelings. This time around, we'd swap. Deal. I agreed without hesitation. But I have conditions. What conditions? First, give me the Gu family's betrothal gift list. I want to spend some of their money first. Second, you can't be a pushover anymore. Julian is someone who responds better to gentleness than force, you need to use your tenderness to win him over. Third, I stared into her eyes. If you ever dare to bear everything alone and not tell me again in this lifetime, I'll be the first one to come after you. Leah's tears turned into laughter as she hugged me tightly. The sky outside the window was almost bright. Tomorrow was the wedding. I picked up my phone and opened Damon's chat interface. In my past life, I had barely spoken to him. He was Leah's husband, completely unrelated to me. But this time, things were different. I sent him a message directly, Mr. Damon, there will be a few small adjustments to tomorrow's wedding. Don't be surprised. He replied instantly, ? I didn't bother responding. I turned around and sent Julian a message, Julian, wait for tomorrow's wedding. I prepared a surprise for you. Julian replied even faster, what kind of trick are you trying to pull now? In my past life, I argued with him for 3 years. In this life, I'll hand Leah over to him and see if he still picks fights with me. Putting down my phone, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I'll make them know what regret means. The next day's wedding was held at the Shangri-La Hotel under the Gu group. In my past life, Leah walked down the spiral staircase in a white wedding dress, beautiful as an angel, but her eyes were full of tension and unease. Damon stood at the end of the red carpet, his expression as cold as if he were attending a business meeting. In this life, it's my turn. I stood in the dressing room, looking at my face in the mirror. It bore a 70% resemblance to my sister's, but our temperaments were completely different. Leah had that fragile beauty that made people want to protect her, while I was a rose with thorns, pretty to look at, but prickly to touch. The makeup artist was busy behind me, asking cautiously, Miss Gu, should I use this shade of lipstick? Who are you calling Miss Gu? I glanced at her. I haven't married into the family yet. Call me Miss Shin. The makeup artist froze for a moment, then awkwardly corrected herself. Beside me, my mother-in-law, no, Leah's mother-in-law, Damon's biological mother, Yvette, was standing at the door, sizing me up with a scrutinizing gaze. So you're Leah's sister? Her tone carried a hint of displeasure. How come you're the one marrying into the family? Wasn't it supposed to be Leah? I turned my head and smiled at her sweetly. Mom, oh wait, I can't call you that yet, not until the ceremony is over. Mrs. Gu, what you just said isn't quite right. So what if someone else is marrying into the family? I'm even more expensive. Yvette's face turned green on the spot. She had probably never seen a daughter-in-law like this before. In her previous life, Leah wouldn't even dare to breathe loudly in front of her. When scolded, she would just tear up and say, I'm sorry. Me? I'm way too good at getting under people's skin. Besides, I said, picking up the diamond ring box on the table and opening it for a look, a 12-carat pigeon's egg, sparkling brilliantly, your son isn't losing out by marrying me. I'm sweeter with words than Leah, better at handling situations than Leah, and more capable of holding up appearances than Leah. You should just count your blessings. Yvette's mouth twitched, and she turned and walked away. The makeup artist beside me was holding back laughter so hard her face turned red. I put on the pigeon egg-sized diamond, took out my phone and snapped a photo, then posted it on Moments. Starting tomorrow, I'll be Mrs. Gu. Thanks to my husband for the pigeon egg, very sparkly, I love it. The photo showed my hand, with the Gu family's betrothal gift list in the background, 30 million in cash, 2 villas, and a limited edition Maybach. As soon as I finished posting, I heard a cold snort beside me. I turned around and saw Gu's eldest daughter, Cecily, Damon's younger sister, leaning against the doorway of the dressing room, arms crossed, looking at me like I was garbage. "So you're the woman replacing Leah to marry into the family," she said, looking me up and down. "I thought you'd be more impressive. Turns out you're nothing special." I put down my phone, my smile growing even brighter, and here I thought the eldest Miss Gu was so elegant. Turns out, she's nothing special. "What did you say?" I said. I enunciated each word. "Shut your mouth. What business is it of yours if I spend my husband's money?" Cecily's face was a spectacle, flushed red, then pale, then purple. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but was pulled back by someone behind her. Damon's assistant, expressionless, said, "Miss Gu, the boss asked you not to cause trouble." Cecily stormed off in a huff. The assistant glanced at me and said in a low voice, "Miss Shin, Mr. Damon asked me to tell you not to go too far." I raised an eyebrow. "Why doesn't he come tell me himself?" The assistant coughed awkwardly. "Mr. Damon is entertaining guests downstairs." I let out a laugh. Damon, I knew exactly what he was like in my past life. Cold. Too cold. Cold to everyone, even to Leah. Leah never heard a single warm word from him until the day she died. But in this life, I am not Leah. I won't lock myself in a room and cry, nor will I swallow my pride and suffer in silence. I am Serafina, and I have never been a pushover. The wedding ceremony starts at 3. I stand at the top of the spiral staircase, my white wedding gown trailing 5 meters behind me, the crystal chandelier above casting a dreamlike glow over everything. At the end of the red carpet stands Damon. He wears a black suit, tall and lean, his face cold and sharp, his features carved like a sculpture. To be honest, he is handsome, more so than Julian. But what good is good looks? Can you eat good looks? In her past life, Leah married a handsome man, and where did that get her? I gather my skirt and descend the stairs step by step. As I pass the guest seating, I spot Leah. She sits beside Julian in a light blue dress, gentle and soft, saying something to him. Julian's expression is strange, not his usual irritability and impatience, but a kind of tenderness I have never seen before. A faint smile tugged at the corner of my lips. It seemed Leah had already made her move. As I reached the end of the red carpet, Damon extended his hand, waiting for me with a blank expression. I placed my hand in his and murmured softly, "Mr. Damon, your hand is quite cold." "Nervous?" Damon looked down at me, his voice low. "Serafina, you'd better not regret this." "Regret?" I let out a laugh. "Regret what?" "Regret marrying a heartthrob like you?" He didn't say anything more, but I noticed his hand tighten slightly. The ceremony was simple, exchanging rings, signing the papers, and that was it. More boring than I had imagined. But the real show was yet to come. The banquet was held in the hotel's largest ballroom, with 30 tables of guests, all of them Gu family relatives and business associates. Yvette sat at the head table, with Cecily by her side. The mother and daughter whispered to each other, occasionally glancing my way with unfriendly eyes. I pretended not to notice, picked up a piece of braised pork belly, chewed it twice, and frowned. "This meat is too tough." Yvette finally couldn't hold back. "Serafina, can't you act like a proper lady for once?" I looked up at her. "What's wrong? Can't I even say the meat is tough? Could you please not smack your lips while eating?" I wasn't smacking my lips. "Are you talking back to me?" I put down my chopsticks and looked at her seriously. "Mom, I call you Mom because I married your son, but that doesn't mean you can nitpick me however you like. I don't smack my lips when I eat. If you don't believe me, you can record it. As for what a proper lady should be like, look at yourself, criticizing your daughter-in-law in public. Is that how a proper lady behaves?" The entire table fell silent. Yvette's face flushed bright red. Cecily stood up. "Serafina, you've gone too far." "Gone too far?" I stood up, half a head taller than her. What were you calling me in the dressing room just now? Nothing special? Let me ask you, what right does an unmarried girl like you have to boss your sister-in-law around? Is this the kind of upbringing the Gu family teaches? Cecily trembled with rage. Enough. A low voice came from beside me. Damon had somehow appeared at my side. He glanced at Cecily and said only one word, sit. Cecily's face turned pale, and she obediently sat down. I raised an eyebrow at him. Damon turned to look at me, his gaze calm. You sit down too. I sat down. But he didn't leave. He sat down beside me, took my bowl, picked out the piece of braised pork belly that was too tough, and replaced it with a tender one. This one isn't tough, he said. I was stunned. Everyone at the table was stunned. Yvette's expression was especially telling. When had her son ever served food to someone else? I glanced down at the braised pork belly in my bowl, unable to suppress the slight curl of my lips. A voice inside me screamed, "Oh no, I think I'm starting to fall for him." But another voice immediately shot back, "Serafina, get a grip. You can't just cave in because he gave you a piece of meat." I took a fierce bite of the meat, swallowing down all those messy thoughts. Wedding night. I came out of the shower, wearing a bathrobe, my hair still dripping. Damon had already changed into his pajamas, leaning against the bed and scrolling through his phone, his expression as indifferent as ever. I climbed onto the bed, sat beside him, and dried my hair with a towel. "Mr. Damon," I began, "let me ask you something." "Speak." "Are you impotent?" His fingers paused for a moment as he looked up at me. I continued, "Or are you gay?" "Serafina," his voice was low, "do you have any idea what you're saying?" "I'm just asking a perfectly normal question," I said, blinking innocently. "Look, you're almost 30, your family's been pressuring you to get married, and you've been putting it off forever. Now that you're finally married, you're treating her like she doesn't exist. Either you're gay or there's something wrong with you, pick one." Damon put down his phone and slowly turned to face me. His eyes were dark, like an unfathomable pool of water. Stared at by such a gaze, a chill suddenly crept up my spine. "Serafina," he said, "ask me that again." "I was asking if you're..." Before I could finish, he lunged at me. The moment his lips pressed against mine, my brain went completely blank. His kiss carried a long-suppressed aggression, a stark contrast to the cold and distant Damon from the daytime. My back pressed against the bed, his hand gripping my waist with a force that seemed afraid I might escape. I thought he would stop at some point. But he didn't. When the sash of my bathrobe was pulled open, I finally regained a shred of reason and reached out to push him. "Wait, hold on." He stopped, hovering above me, breathing heavily, his eyes dark as a stormy sea. "Still think I'm gay?" His voice was hoarse beyond recognition. I swallowed hard. No, I don't." He lowered his head, his lips brushing against my ear, his voice so low that only I could hear, "Serafina, you came to me yourself." Then he turned off the lights. That night, I regretted asking that question. Deeply regretted it. The next morning, I was woken up by my phone vibrating. Opening my eyes, the space beside me was empty, but the pillow still carried a faint scent of mint. I reached for my phone and saw that Leah had sent over 20 messages. "Sis. Guess what happened last night? Julian, he actually cried. He hugged me and said the person he's most sorry for in this life is you. He said the reason he argued with you in his past life wasn't because he hated you, but because he felt he wasn't good enough for you, he was angry at himself." "Sis, are you still there? You're not doing something unspeakable with Damon, are you?" I laughed out loud. My fingers tapped on the screen, done with the indescribable, "Go on." Leah replied instantly, "Julian said he knew in his past life that you took a knife for him, but by then you two were already divorced. He said he had to treat you well in this life, but he never expected that the one marrying him would be me. Then he said..." "What did he say?" "He said he doesn't dislike me either, and that he likes gentle girls." Sis, what do you think he means by that? The smile at the corner of my mouth deepened. Leah, that sweet, naive girl, didn't even realize she'd been confessed to. He means he likes you, I typed. Don't let him down. Leah sent a string of shy emojis. I put down my phone, lay back on the bed, and stared blankly at the ceiling. In my past life, both Julian and Leah died. In this life, they were both still alive, and seemed to be doing well. As for me, the door suddenly swung open. Damon walked in carrying a tray, dressed in a suit and tie, his expression indifferent, a world apart from the wild man from last night. He set the tray on the nightstand, which held a bowl of porridge, 2 small dishes of pickled vegetables, and a glass of warm water. Breakfast, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Mr. Damon personally serving breakfast? The housekeeper made it. I meant you serving it, not you making it. He glanced at me, said nothing, and turned to leave. I picked up the bowl of congee, scooped a spoonful into my mouth. It was century egg and lean pork congee, at just the right temperature. After breakfast, I went downstairs and found the atmosphere in the living room tense. Yvette sat on the sofa, her face ashen. Cecily stood beside her, arms crossed, wearing an expression of someone enjoying the show. On the coffee table lay a sheet of paper with several printed photos on it. I walked over to take a look and couldn't help but laugh. It was a photo of me, one from when I was working at a bar in high school. In the picture, I was wearing a server's uniform, my hair tied back in a ponytail, wiping a wine glass. Serafina, Yvette's voice was as cold as shards of ice. Would you mind telling me what this is all about? I picked up the photo and glanced at it. It's a picture of me working at a bar. What's the big deal? What's the big deal? Yvette's voice trembled with anger. Do you have any idea what kind of family the Gus are? My son married the eldest daughter of the Shin family, not a bar waitress. And you had the nerve to hide your past. Mom, I interrupted her, when did I ever hide it? I said from the very beginning that I was the eldest daughter of the Shin family. Can't the eldest daughter of the Shin family work at a bar? You, in a place like that bar? What's wrong with a place like that? My voice wasn't loud, but every word carried weight. I graduated high school at 18, had nothing to do over summer break, and worked at a bar to earn some pocket money. So what? I didn't steal or rob anyone, it was legal labor. Is that something to be ashamed of? Yvette was left speechless. Cecily cut in, a girl like you going to a place like that bar, who knows what you... Shut up, I turned to look at her. Say one more word, and I'll print out the photos of you from last year at the nightclub, the ones where you're caught with your arms around 3 guys, and paste them right on this paper. You believe me? Cecily's face instantly turned pale. How do you know? How I know doesn't matter, I let out a laugh and pointed at myself. I run an MCN agency. Do you think anything in the influencer circle can escape me? That video of you cuddling up to those 3 guys at the nightclub last year was circulating in a small circle for at least 3 months. Cecily shrank her neck and dared not speak anymore. Yvette was trembling with rage and was about to speak when footsteps came from the stairs. Damon walked downstairs, glanced at the photo on the coffee table, then looked at me. I thought he might say something, like Mom, stop messing around or something along those lines. But he picked up the photo, looked at it for a few seconds, and said, Mom, do you know what this bar is now? Yvette was taken aback. A chain brand, valued at over $100 million, Damon placed the photo back on the coffee table. That girl who was wiping glasses back then is one of the founders. What are you trying to prove with this photo? That your daughter-in-law had business acumen at 18? The living room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I glanced at Damon, thinking to myself that this guy was surprisingly good at defending his own. But I didn't want to rely entirely on him. I walked up to Yvette, picked up the photo, folded it twice, and tucked it into my pocket. Mom, I said, I was working at a bar at 18, started my first company at 20, and built an MCN that ranked in the top 10 of the industry by 24. If you think I'm not qualified to be the Gu family's daughter-in-law, I can print out my resume, and you can take your time finding fault with it. Yvette opened her mouth but couldn't find the words. Damon turned and walked out. As he passed me, he said in a low voice, "There's a card in the study. The password is your birthday. Go buy whatever you want." I was stunned for a moment. "How do you know my birthday?" He didn't answer, already out the door. But I noticed a faint curve at the corner of his mouth. This man was smiling. That card was black. The kind with no spending limit. I swiped it all day at the mall, sweeping through the luxury section, charging into the jewelry district, and storming into the haute couture zone. The saleslady's smiles shifted from professional to genuinely radiant, calling out Mrs. Gu non-stop. I thought to myself, that title sounds pretty nice. At 4 in the afternoon, I dragged over a dozen shopping bags back to the old mansion. The maid's hands were trembling when she opened the door, not from exhaustion, but from fear, because Yvette was sitting in the living room. When she saw my haul, her face was even uglier than yesterday. "Serafina," Yvette's voice seemed to squeeze through her teeth, "how much did you buy?" "Not much, I had the maid carry the things upstairs. Just spent a little over 2 million. "Over 2 million? Yvette shot up from her seat. "Are you out of your mind? Damon's money doesn't grow on trees." I took my time changing my shoes. "Mom, that's not quite right. Your son's money certainly doesn't grow on trees, but this is legally acquired marital property. I'm spending my husband's money, what business is it of yours?" "You." Besides, I clapped my hands and smiled at her sweetly, "that mink coat you're wearing must be at least 300,000 or 400,000, right? And that necklace around your neck, it's a limited edition Cartier, isn't it? Isn't that Gu's money you're spending? So how come I'm crazy for spending, but you're perfectly justified?" Yvette's chest heaved violently with anger. But this time, she didn't keep arguing like before. She stared at me for a few seconds, then suddenly turned and walked away. I was taken aback. That wasn't like her. That evening, when Damon came home, I casually mentioned, "Why did your mom just leave without finishing our argument today?" Damon paused while taking off his coat. "I talked to her." "About what?" "I told her that if she keeps causing you trouble, I'll move out." I raised an eyebrow. "She's afraid of you moving out?" "There are many things she's afraid of," Damon said in a flat tone, "but the main thing is, she knows I'm serious." When he said the word serious, his gaze fell on me with a depth I couldn't decipher. That voice inside me was shouting again, "Oh no, my heart is racing." But I kept my composure, turning around to unbox the bags I bought today. Damon walked to the entrance of the walk-in closet, glanced at the wardrobe full of new clothes, and frowned. "Why didn't you buy any bags?" "I did, I bought 3. He flipped through them, found the 3 bags, took a look, and said, "Too few." I froze. He took out his phone, opened a shopping page, and handed it to me. "This store is getting new arrivals tomorrow. I had someone reserve one for you, just go pick it up." I looked down and saw it was the Hermès VIP reservation page, with 3 limited edition Birkins reserved, each starting at $1 million. I looked up at him. "Damon, are you this generous with every woman?" He looked at me, expressionless, and said, "You're the first one." His tone was calm when he said this, as if stating a fact. But I caught a different meaning. The first. And the only one. I wanted to say something to snap back, but the words that came out were, "Are you up to something?" Damon suddenly laughed. Not the kind of smile that barely lifts the corners of the mouth, but a Real laugh, with the corners of his eyes crinkling. "The conspiracy is," he said, "to get you used to spending, so you won't want to run away." My face flushed, and I grabbed a throw pillow to hurl at him. He caught it. "There's one more thing," he said, setting down the throw pillow. "There's a family dinner at the Gu's tomorrow evening. My mom arranged it." "Family banquet?" "All the relatives will come," he loosened his tie, "including my sister-in-law. In her past life, Leah had mentioned this aunt to me, the most vicious woman in the Gu family, sharp-tongued and ruthless. On the very first day Leah married into the family, she publicly declared at the family banquet that Leah was unworthy of the Gu family. I laughed. Fine, I said, I'll go tomorrow. Damon glanced at me. Aren't you afraid? What's there to be afraid of? I stood up, walked over to him, and looked up at him. Damon, you remember this, your wife here has never known how to spell the word fear. He lowered his head, his gaze lingering on my face for a few seconds. Then he reached out, took hold of my chin, and gently brushed his thumb across my lips. Tomorrow, he said, do as you please. I raised an eyebrow. Aren't you afraid I'll offend all your relatives? So what if I offend someone? His voice was soft. I'm Damon. What I say goes. When he said this, there was a light in his eyes. Not a cold, indifferent light, but a kind of indulgence. As if no matter what I did, he would always have my back. I turned and walked into the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. In the mirror, my face was as red as a boiled shrimp. I scolded myself inwardly, Serafina, can't you have a little more self-control? The family banquet on the second day was held in the banquet hall of the Gu family's old mansion, with 5 tables set up, and all the guests were relatives of the Gu family. Damon's grandparents passed away early, and the one truly in charge of the Gu family now was his uncle Reginald. I wore a custom red haute couture gown, adorned with the diamond ring Damon gave me, and walked into the banquet hall on his arm. Everyone's eyes were on us. So this is Damon's new wife? A middle-aged woman stood up, Damon's aunt, Dorothy. She circled around me, clicking her tongue twice. You're not bad-looking, but isn't this outfit a bit too flashy? A daughter-in-law of the Gu family should keep a lower profile. I smiled and said, Auntie is right. Next time I'll dress more plainly. But since it's my first time meeting the elders today, I thought I should dress a bit more formally. Dorothy didn't expect me to be so articulate. She paused for a moment, then shifted her approach. I heard your sister was originally supposed to marry into the family. How did it end up being you? This question was quite pointed, clearly implying that I had stolen my sister's marriage. Before I could speak, Damon said first, it was me who switched. Everyone looked at him. Damon said expressionlessly, I've met Serafina, and I think she suits me better. As soon as those words were spoken, the table fell silent. Dorothy's expression shifted slightly, and she gave an awkward smile. So that's how it is. I glanced sideways at Damon. He pulled out the chair for me with a blank expression, and after I sat down, he took the seat beside me. This man was protecting me. Once the family banquet officially began, Dorothy indeed didn't let up. Sitting diagonally across from me, she asked while eating, Serafina, where did you work before? I'm in investment, running a small company of my own. Oh? What company? A MCN agency, mainly focused on influencer incubation and content marketing. Dorothy frowned. An influencer? The kind that postures and preens online? Someone at the table chuckled softly. I put down my chopsticks and smiled at her. Aunt, what you're describing is low-quality content. What our company does is produce high-quality content in a vertical field. For example, last year we helped a poverty-stricken county sell over 30 million yuan worth of agricultural products. That story made the news. If you're interested, I can find you the link. Dorothy's smile froze. Uncle Reginald, however, became intrigued. Oh? That agricultural products project was yours? Yes, Uncle. Not bad, Reginald nodded. Damon, you've chosen a good wife. Dorothy's face grew even more unpleasant. She picked up her glass, took a sip, and changed the subject. Serafina, how old are you? 26. 26, huh, Dorothy said with a meaningful smile. Damon is 31 this year, a 5-year difference. That's quite an age gap. Will there be a generation gap between them later on? I smiled at her and asked, "Auntie, how many years apart are you and Uncle?" Dorothy was taken aback. "I'm the same age as your uncle." "Then don't you and Uncle have a generation gap?" The table fell silent again. Someone couldn't help but laugh out loud. Dorothy's face turned completely dark. She put down her chopsticks, her tone shifting. "Serafina, what kind of attitude is that? I am your elder, and I ask you questions out of concern." I also put down my chopsticks and looked at her. "Auntie, you asked me 3 questions. The first was about me dressing too flashy, and I explained. The second was about my job, and I explained that too. The third was about the age gap, and I answered that as well. Was there anything wrong with my attitude? You. Or perhaps," I said in a voice just loud enough for the whole table to hear, "you're not really asking about these things at all, you're just looking for something to criticize about me?" Dorothy stood up abruptly. "Damon, look at the kind of person you married." Damon remained silent, eating his food with his head down. When his aunt called him, he slowly lifted his head, glanced at Dorothy who had stood up, and then looked at me. "Aunt," he said, "please sit down and eat. The food is getting cold." Dorothy trembled with rage. "Are you just going to let your wife get away with this?" Damon put down his chopsticks, wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin, and stood up. He was a head taller than Dorothy, and the look in his eyes as he gazed down at her was terrifyingly calm. "Little aunt," his voice wasn't loud, but the entire banquet hall fell silent. "Serafina is my wife. Indulging her is my right. Finding fault with her is not your right." Dorothy's face was deathly pale. "If you feel you can't eat this meal," Damon continued, "I'll have someone take you back." Dorothy stood there, unable to move forward or backward. In the end, it was Uncle who smoothed things over. All right, we're all family. Let's eat, let's eat." Dorothy sat down with a livid face. Under the table, my hand was suddenly grasped. Damon's hand was large, with well-defined knuckles, and his palm was dry, warm. He didn't look at me, his other hand still reaching for food, but under the table, his hand held mine tightly. I bit my lip, holding back the urge to laugh. That voice inside me was shouting again, "It's over, this time it's really over." I pinched my palm with my fingernail. "Serafina, get a grip." But it was no use. The heartbeat doesn't lie. After the family dinner, Yvette's attitude began to shift subtly. Not a sudden improvement, but rather a kind of tentative approach. The day after the family banquet, she brought a bowl of bird's nest soup to my room. "You drank quite a bit last night," she said, placing the bowl on the table with a somewhat awkward tone. "Have some bird's nest soup to soothe your stomach." I was stunned. In my past life, Leah had been married into the family for 3 years, and Yvette had never once brought her a bowl of soup. "Thanks, Mom." I picked it up and took a sip. Yvette stood nearby, hesitating as if she wanted to say something. "Mom, just say what you have to say." Yvette hesitated for a moment. "What happened yesterday was Jingfeng's fault. That's just how she is, sharp's a tongue." I raised an eyebrow. "So you're here today to apologize on her behalf?" "I'm not apologizing for her." Yvette's expression grew even more complicated. "I just wanted to say, you did pretty well yesterday." Now I was truly stunned. Yvette actually praised me? But, Yvette shifted her tone, "From now on, at family banquets, don't talk back to the elders. The Gu family is, after all, a prominent household." "Mom," I interrupted her, "are you praising me or lecturing me?" Yvette was taken aback by my retort. She opened her mouth, then finally sighed. "Do you think I want to meddle? Damon told me that if I keep causing you trouble, he'll move out. What else can I do?" She finished speaking and turned away. I watched her retreating figure, a sickly mother, who had spent her entire life fearing the loss of her son, and thus drove away every woman who came close to him. But when her son said, "If you bother her again, I'll move out," that sentence was a more effective threat to her than any argument. Because her deepest fear was being abandoned by her son. So she stopped causing trouble. Not because she had changed, but because she was afraid. A flicker of complicated feelings stirred within me. But it was just a flicker. In the afternoon, Leah came back. "Sis." Her voice was filled with excitement. "Julian and I have set a date, the wedding is on the 18th of next month." "That soon?" "He said he doesn't want to wait anymore." Leah's voice suddenly dropped. "He said he owed you in a past life, so in this one, he's going to treat me twice as well. Sis, he's really changed, you know? Yesterday, he took me to pick out a wedding dress. We spent 4 whole hours there, and he didn't show a hint of impatience, he even helped me with ideas." I smiled. "Looks like my sweet, naive little sister has finally found the right one." "Sis," Leah suddenly turned serious. "How are things going with you and Damon? Is he treating you well?" I thought for a moment. "Not bad." "What do you mean, not bad?" "Well." I organized my thoughts. "He's very protective of me, but he never takes the initiative to say he likes me. I'm starting to wonder if he has some kind of emotional expression disorder." Leah laughed on the other end of the line. "Sis, do you have a crush on him?" My face flushed. "Who likes him?" "I'm just being objective." I hung up directly. But after hanging up, I stared at my phone screen and saw a message from Leah. "Sis, you deserve to be treated well." I didn't reply. But those words lingered in my heart for a long time. When Damon came back in the evening, he brought a bouquet of flowers. Not the kind of random arrangement from a flower shop, but a bunch of pure white eustomas wrapped in dark green paper, so elegant it was almost unreal. He handed the flowers to me. "Picked them up from a flower shop on the way." I took the flowers and lowered my head to smell them. The flower language of eustomas is unchanging love. I looked up at him. "Damon, what kind of woman do you actually like?" He set down his briefcase, turned to look at me, and asked, "Why do you ask?" "I'm just curious," I said, inserting the flowers into the vase. "Someone like you wouldn't just marry anyone, would you?" The living room fell silent for a few seconds. Damon walked over and stood close behind me, so close I could catch the faint scent of cedarwood cologne on him. "Serafina," his voice was low. "Do you think I'm the kind of person who does things casually?" I turned around and looked up at him. He was backlit, his expression hard to make out, but those eyes shone like stars in the dark night. "Are you serious?" I asked. He didn't answer. He lowered his head and kissed me. Unlike the kiss on our wedding night, this one was slow, gentle, as if he was confirming something. His hands cupped my face, his thumbs brushing across my cheeks, his lips pressed against mine as he murmured, "You guess." Then he let go of me and went upstairs. I stood in the living room, still holding that eustoma in my hand, my face so hot it could fry an egg. Guess my ass. When I lay down on the bed, a thought suddenly flashed through my mind. Before Leah married into the family in my past life, Julian seemed to be quite close with Damon. Not the kind of closeness between ordinary cousins, but the kind. I couldn't quite put it into words. Also, Julian's surname is Shen, not Gu. Although he said he took his mother's surname, I've always found it a bit strange. Oh well, I won't dwell on it. Leah's wedding was on May 18th, at a manor on the outskirts of the city. The day before the wedding, she delivered the invitation to the Gu family's old residence. She wore a cream-colored dress, her long hair cascading over her shoulders, and smiled so gently that she seemed to glow all over. "Sis," she said, handing me the invitation, "you have to come." I opened the invitation, which bore the names of Leah and Julian. "Did Julian pick this place?" I asked. "Yeah," Leah nodded. "He said it's quiet there, not as noisy as a hotel." I let out a laugh. In my past life, Julian and I had our wedding at the same hotel, loud and chaotic, ending in a bitter split. This time around, he's learned to pick a quiet place. Yvette came downstairs, and her expression shifted when she saw Leah. "Leah's here?" Her tone was a bit strained. Leah stood up politely. "Hello, Aunt Yvette." Yvette hummed an acknowledgement, her gaze sweeping over Leah before turning to me, as if she wanted to say something but held back. I knew what she was thinking. She must have been wondering if she had swapped the wrong person, since Leah seemed far easier to handle than her prickly sister. "Mom," I said with a grin, "Leah's getting married next month. Do you want to come to the wedding banquet?" Yvette forced a faint smile. "We'll see." She turned and went upstairs. On the day of the wedding, I wore a champagne-colored dress, holding Damon's arm as we walked into the estate. The estate was beautifully decorated, an arch of white roses and eucalyptus leaves, candles, and floral arrangements on the long white tablecloths, a red carpet laid across the lawn, and at the end of it, a circular ceremony platform. Julian stood on the platform, dressed in a dark blue suit, his hair neatly combed. He looked extremely nervous, constantly adjusting his tie. "Even Julian gets nervous?" I whispered to Damon. Damon looked down at me. "He's human too." I snorted. "When he married me in my past life, he didn't show a single expression the whole time. He signed the papers and left." Damon glanced at me but said nothing. The music started, and Leah appeared at the other end of the red carpet. She was wearing that backless wedding gown, her veil trailing to the floor, holding a bouquet of white baby's breath in her hands. She walked step by step, each one steady, her eyes fixed only on Julian. Julian's eyes were red. He was really crying. Under everyone's gaze, this man who had argued with me for 3 years in our past life was crying like a fool. Leah walked up to him and said with a smile, "Why are you crying?" Julian held her hand, his voice choked with emotion, "Because I've waited for you for 2 lifetimes." As soon as he said that, the whole room fell silent. My eyes were red too. Damon tightened his grip on my hand. After the ceremony came the banquet, held in the estate's glass conservatory. Warm yellow lights, tables laden with delicacies, guests clinking glasses and toasting. Julian drank a lot, going from table to offer toasts. By the time he reached our table, he was already 7 or 8 parts drunk. He held his wine glass, looking at me with a complicated gaze. "Serafina," his voice trembled slightly as he said my name, "in the past life." "I'm sorry." I stood up and raised my glass. "Don't say sorry. Just treat Leah well in this life." He nodded, his eyes reddening again. "I will. If I ever dare to treat Leah badly in this life, you come and punch me." I smiled. Julian smiled too. He turned to look at Leah beside him, his gaze so gentle it didn't seem like the same hot-tempered man from the past life. After the banquet ended, the guests gradually departed. Damon and I stood at the manor entrance waiting for the car, the night breeze blowing in, carrying the scent of flowers. "Damon," I suddenly spoke up, "it seems like your relationship with Julian is more than just cousins, isn't it?" Damon glanced at me. "Why do you ask?" "Feeling," I said, "there's something between you two. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it doesn't feel like cousins." Damon was silent for a few seconds. "I'll tell you later," he said. The car arrived, and he opened the door. I didn't press further. But the doubt in my heart grew larger and larger. The day after the wedding, Leah and Julian flew to the Maldives for their honeymoon. I was bored out of my mind at home. Yvette has indeed been much quieter these past few days, not that she's gotten better, but she's grown more silent. The way she looks at me is still complicated, but she no longer stirs up trouble. Cecily has also learned her lesson and takes a detour whenever she sees me. But the peace didn't last 2 days before something happened. That afternoon, I was lying on a lounge chair in the garden, binge-watching a show, when I suddenly heard the sound of something smashing in the living room. I walked over and saw Cecily standing in the middle of the room, her face pale, with a shattered vase on the floor. She was holding her phone, and her hands were trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked. Cecily looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Serafina, can you lend me some money?" I raised an eyebrow. "You, a young lady from the Gu family, asking me for money?" Cecily bit her lip. Someone filmed a video of me. They want me to transfer $3 million to them, or they'll post the video online. I understood immediately. What kind of video? Cecily fell silent. You don't have to tell me, I already know, I said lazily, leaning against the doorframe. Is it that video of you cuddling with someone at the nightclub? Cecily's tears started falling. It's not just cuddling, there's something even worse. I let out a sigh. This girl might have a sharp tongue, but at the end of the day, she's just a brainless rich heiress who doesn't even realize she's been set up. Did you call the police? I asked. Can't call the police. Cecily panicked. If my dad finds out, he'll beat me to death. Did you tell your brother, then? No, not him either. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. Who are you looking for? Cecily stammered. I flipped through my phone as I spoke. I have a friend who specializes in handling this kind of thing. In my past life, I paused, I've helped several influencers deal with similar blackmail before. I dialed a number. Hey, Marcus? It's me, Serafina. I need a favor. Cecily listened, dumbfounded. After the call, I put my phone away. Done. Where did that person ask you to hand over the money? He said at a coffee shop in the west of the city. Alright, my friend will have people waiting there. When he shows up, detain him directly, then call the police. Cecily stared at me for several seconds. What does your friend do? He's in security, but has a long-term partnership with the police station. This kind of thing needs to be handled by professionals. Cecily's tears started falling again. Alright, stop crying, I waved my hand. You look awful when you cry. When Damon came back in the evening, Cecily took the initiative to tell him what had happened. After she finished, she stole a glance at me and whispered, Bro, if it weren't for sister-in-law today, I'd be done for. Damon turned to look at me. I shrugged. It was nothing. He didn't say anything, but after I came out of the shower that night, I noticed a jewelry box on the nightstand. I opened it to find a Van Cleef & Arpels necklace. Beneath it was a note, thank you. I held the necklace up to my neck, comparing it, and smiled at myself in the mirror. This man, he had to write out his thanks. I left the bedroom and knocked on the study door. Come in. I pushed the door open. Damon was sitting behind the desk, reviewing some documents. He looked up at me, his gaze landing on the necklace around my neck. Does it look good? I spun around. Yeah. I received the note you wrote, I said, walking over and leaning on the desk to look at him. But I want to hear you say it to my face. Damon put down his pen and leaned back in his chair, looking at me. Serafina, you helped Cecily today. I'm grateful for that. That's it? What else do you want to hear? I walked around the desk, stepped in front of him, and leaned in close. Damon, I said, can you, just once, be a normal person and say something real to me? He looked at me, saying nothing. Do you actually like me? I asked. Not that husband-to-wife sense of duty, but the kind where, you want to be with me, not because we're married, but because you want to. Do you? At all? The study was silent. Damon slowly stood up and looked down at me. Serafina, he said, why do you think I agreed to replace Leah? I froze. Do you think, he said slowly, that I agreed to let your sister marry my brother for no reason? What do you mean? Julian, he said, is my half-brother. My mind went blank for a moment. My father brought him back to the Gu family after his mother passed away, but kept it hidden for the sake of the family's reputation, Damon said calmly. Very few people in the Gu family know about this. Even my mother doesn't know. So the person Leah was supposed to marry was always meant to be my brother. And the person you were supposed to marry was always meant to be me. I stared at him, my mind racing through the memories of my past life. Then in the last life, I asked, Why wasn't it arranged that way? Damon's gaze dimmed slightly. In the last life, I didn't have time to arrange it, he said. The marriage was entirely handled by my mother. By the time I realized what was happening, the wedding date was already set. And in this life? In this lifetime, he said, I'm done waiting. But how do you know Leah would be willing to switch? How do you know I'd agree? Damon reached out and tucked the stray strands of hair behind my ear. I don't know, he said. But I took a gamble. On what? I bet your sister will be scared, and she'll definitely come crying to you. I bet you'll stand up for her and agree to switch places in the marriage. And you won the bet? I won the bet. I stared at him for a long time. So your question, he said, is whether I actually like you? His lips brushed against my earlobe, his voice so low that only I could hear. I like you. I've liked you for 8 whole years. 8 years. The word exploded like a bomb in my mind. I pushed him away and took 2 steps back. What did you say? 8 years? We didn't even know each other 8 years ago. Damon leaned against the desk, hands in his pockets. Summer of 2016, he said. That bar on the west side of town. My heart clenched. Summer of 2016. The bar on the west side. That was where I worked during the summer break when I was 18. That night, Damon's voice was soft. Someone started a fight in the place, smashing a bottle at someone. You rushed in and took the hit, the bottle shattered against your shoulder. You didn't make a sound. Instead, you grabbed another bottle and smashed it right back. He paused, a faint smile curling at the corners of his mouth. You were wearing the bar's uniform back then, your ponytail tied high, your face covered in blood, but the way you smiled, it was like you were glowing. I remembered. There had indeed been a disturbance that day, and I had indeed stepped in to block it. But I had absolutely no recollection of anyone else being there. You were there? I asked. I was in the corner, Damon said. That day, I had just taken over the GU group. The pressure was immense, so I went to the bar alone for a drink. He walked over and lifted my chin with his hand. From that day on, I knew that in this life, I only wanted to marry you. The study was so quiet that the ticking of the clock on the wall could be heard. Then why didn't you say it sooner? My voice was a little hoarse. What about the past life? Why didn't you come after me in the past life? Damon let go of his hand and turned around. His back looked very stiff. Because of my mom. What's wrong with your mother? She has severe paranoid personality disorder, he said. It's not just a bad temper, it's an illness. She has an extreme need for control, especially over me. Ever since I was a child, she never allowed any woman to get close to me. My 3 previous fiancés were all driven away by her. I was stunned. That's why I didn't dare get close to you in my past life, he said in a low voice. I was afraid she would hurt you. And what about this life? Why do you dare now? Damon turned around and looked at me. Because you're different now. Different how? You don't carry everything alone anymore. You argue, you make a scene, you talk back to my mom until she's speechless. When you're wronged, you don't hold it in, you fight back on the spot. He walked over and stood before me. Serafina, in this life, I chose you not because I need to protect you. It's because I know you don't need my protection. You just need me by your side. I opened my mouth, wanting to say something, but found my throat a little tight. What about the day we got the marriage certificate? I barely managed to squeeze out the words. The ID card, he said. Leah's ID card was the old one, yours was a newly reissued one with a different photo. The clerk at the Civil Affairs Bureau noticed it at a glance, and I asked him not to say anything. You knew it was me back then? Yeah. Then why didn't you call me out? Damon lowered his head, his lips brushing against the top of my hair. Because I wanted to see what you would do. I lifted my head and glared at him. You were just messing with me. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. I'm not messing with you, he said. I'm waiting for you. Waiting for you to realize that I'm not the person you thought I was. I stared at him for a few seconds, then suddenly reached out and pinched his cheek. Damon, you're really asking for a beating. He took my hand and pressed a kiss to it. You wouldn't dare. I was left speechless. This guy, cold as an iceberg when aloof, but a volcano when it came to sweet talk. The contrast was just too much. The day Leah returned from her honeymoon, I went to pick her up at the airport. She was a bit tanned, but she was glowing all over, her eyes sparkling. Sis. She rushed over and hugged me. The Maldives was so beautiful. I smiled and put my arm around her shoulder as we walked out. Julian followed behind, pushing the luggage cart. Leah, I said suddenly after we got in the car, Damon told me something. Leah was touching up her makeup. She turned to look at me. What is it? He said he recognized me from 8 years ago. Leah's hand froze. At the bar, the summer I worked there. He was in the corner, watching me block that bottle. Leah set down the lipstick and looked at me quietly. He also said that in the past life, he didn't dare get close to me because he was afraid his mother would hurt me. In this life, he took a gamble at the wedding, betting that we would switch brides. Leah's eyes reddened. Sis, she said, so you finally know? You knew all along? Leah nodded. Julian told me. He said Damon had been in love with someone for 8 years, never daring to get close, afraid that the trouble surrounding him would drag her down. It wasn't until he got a second chance that he dared to take this gamble. She took my hand. Sis, Damon isn't someone who falls easily, but with you, it's real. My eyes welled up again. All right, I wiped away my tears, let's not talk about this anymore. Did Mom come to your wedding? Leah's expression changed. Mom didn't come, she said. Dad didn't come either. My heart sank. Are they still angry? Julian called them 3 times, and they hung up each time. I paused for a moment, then picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in a long time. The phone rang 6 times before someone picked up. Hey, Mom. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then a voice choked with tears came through. Serafina, how could you do this? Mom, I said, please don't cry. Listen to me. Leah is happy now, 100 times happier than in her past life. The man she married will treat her well and won't let her suffer. If you love her, don't be angry. My father's voice came through from the other end, give me the phone. After some wrestling, my father's voice came through, Serafina, where are you now? At the airport, just picked up Leah. You both come back here, my dad said in a firm tone. Now. Right this instant. I glanced at Leah. She nervously grabbed my hand. Okay, I said. We're coming back. The Shin family's old mansion looked just the same as always. In the living room sat my dad, my mom, and my grandmother. My dad's expression was stern, my mom's eyes were red, but my grandmother was all smiles. Kneel down, my father said. Leah's legs went weak as if she was about to kneel, but I held her back. Dad, I said, if you want to scold someone, scold me. The idea was mine. Don't make Leah kneel. My father glared at me. You think I won't scold you? You can scold me, but you need to make things clear first. My father took a deep breath. Both of you, explain to me clearly, why did you switch marriages? Dad, I began, do you know about the relationship between Damon and Julian? My father frowned. What kind of relationship? Blood brothers. Half brothers, same father. My father was stunned. Damon's father had an illegitimate son outside, that's Julian. So you thought it was a marriage swap? No. We just switched from one person to another, but we never left the Gu family. My mother opened her mouth. But Leah was supposed to marry Damon. Mom, I said, Leah doesn't need a rich husband, she needs someone who understands and cherishes her. Julian is that person. And what about you? My dad asked. Do you think you're a good match for Damon? I smiled. Dad, Damon's mother isn't someone just anyone can handle. Leah can't deal with her, but I can. My dad was silent for a long time. Grandma suddenly spoke up, all right, everyone sit down and talk. The moment Grandma said that, my dad's authority deflated by half. But Mom, my dad tried to say something. But what but? Grandma shot him a glare. These two granddaughters of yours are far smarter than they were in their past lives. I jerked my head toward Grandma. Past lives. She said past lives. Grandma, my voice trembled slightly, you. Grandma looked at me with a beaming smile. My dear granddaughter, did you think reincarnation was a privilege reserved just for the two of you? My mind went blank with a loud bang. Grandma remembers too. Grandma picked up her teacup and took a slow sip. On the night Leah jumped off the building in the last life, I had a dream. In the dream, a voice said to me, I'll give you one more chance. Who do you choose? I said, I choose my granddaughter. She set down the teacup and looked at me and Leah. So I came back. Came back to watch over the two of you, to make sure you live this life better than the last. Leah threw herself into Grandma's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. My mom was crying too. My dad sat there with a complicated expression, but his eyes were red as well. I stood in the middle of the living room, watching this room full of people crying their eyes out, and slowly, a smile crept across my face. It was past 9 in the evening when I came out of the Shin family home. Damon's car was parked at the entrance, and he was leaning against the door, waiting for me. How did it go? He asked. Not bad, I said as I walked over. My dad scolded me for half an hour, and then Grandma scolded him back. Grandma? My grandmother, I said, she also remembers her past life. Damon's expression didn't change at all. You're not surprised? I raised an eyebrow. Not surprised, he said, opening the car door. Get in. I got into the car. After a few minutes of driving, I suddenly spoke up, Damon, can you stop hiding things from now on? If you like something, say it. If you're hurting, say it. If you want something, say it. If you don't tell me, how am I supposed to know? He looked ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel. Okay, he said. Just okay? He turned his head to glance at me, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. I want to move out. I froze. What? Move out of the old house, he said. Just the two of us. Your mom agreed? I don't need her agreement, his voice was calm. I make the decisions. I stared at his profile for a few seconds, then suddenly smiled. Fine, I said. We'll move. The curve of Damon's lips lifted a little more. The car stopped at a red light, and he turned to look at me. Serafina, he said, in this life, I won't let you regret it. I leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. If you ever make me regret this, I said, I'll blow through all your money and then skip town. He laughed. Not that faint, barely their smile, but a real laugh, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Fine, he said. If you blow it all, it's on me. The light turned green. He stepped on the gas, and the car merged into the flow of traffic. I leaned back in my seat, watching the neon lights outside the window recede one by one. It felt good to get a second chance. It felt good to have met him.